reduction in pay. You can't do those things. You can't do the things that ordinary businesses do in similar circumstances when they have a revenue problem. I think it's not smart for us to say, well, we're going to solve that problem by giving school districts an ability to raise revenue, but at the same time, we're not going to give them any ability to control costs. So I would support this if there is, in addition to this, provisions that would allow school boards, by vote of the board, to do things to manage the single biggest cost of their district, which is employee costs. And I don't know how you feel about that. Maybe you want to address that. But I think that the current structure that we have that governs the costs of employees is antiquated, it is archaic, it is unique, and it should be changed. And while I fully support the thing that you're talking about, I think to make it work, you also have to give boards an opportunity to control costs. And I invite your comment about that idea and whether you support that.
Maybe we could, Superintendent.
Thank you, Senator Lovett. Michael Lovett, Superintendent of the White Bear Lake Area Schools. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm going to take a somewhat broader view, reflecting on the last 40 years.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Dr. Lovett or others, Chairman Swanson. I'm still interested in an answer to my question. Do you have any interest as a district in changing laws that would facilitate the ability of your district to manage the single biggest expense that you have, which are employee costs? And as I said, coming from a school board and having been here for a few years, it seems to me that that is a critical component of this. If we're going to say that school boards, and I agree, ought to have the authority to raise revenues, and if you want voters to hold them accountable, which I believe they should, then they also have to have the power to manage costs. And I think it's very troubling that we do not have that, at least as I understand it, that ability. And I'd be interested to know whether you would support changes in laws that would facilitate the ability of school boards to manage the biggest cost that they have, which is their employee costs.
Mr. Chair, could I get a clarification from Senator Hann on his question? Because you're right, the single largest cost are personnel costs. Most of them are done through collective bargaining. So is it your suggestion that somehow the collective bargaining laws be changed so that the school boards can go back and undo what has been bargained and change that? I'm not quite sure what the question is.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Betzold, yes, I am advocating that we change the collective bargaining structure, which I think is antiquated, it is anachronistic, it is unique, and no other organization in the state operates on these kinds of rules. And it is, to me, I think back to 2003 when we had the big budget deficit and there was no increase in funding from the state, and not a single school district in the state was able to hold their spending flat, even though there was no additional revenue. And I think those kinds of structures cannot be sustained given where we are today and given the economic situation, and given the fact that the revenues are not going to be predictable. And while I certainly support the point that you're making about giving school boards an opportunity to raise levy funds on a vote of the board and being held accountable by voters, they also ought to be in a position to say we are going to manage our school costs by doing things that will hold those costs down. And if we've got a structure in law that prevents that, then we ought to contemplate a change. And I'm just asking whether the people here representing the school district support those kinds of changes.
Mr. Chair, before they answer, that's not part of my bill. So.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Betzold, I know it's not part of your bill. I'm asking the school district representatives here whether they would support, in addition to what they're asking for here, the same kinds of powers that would give them ability to manage their costs.
And to a large extent in that area, a lot of federally driven mandates that districts have to comply with, and our reach.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I understand that, and I'm not asking that we change federal law, but we certainly have control over our public employee labor relation laws in the state that do govern the collective bargaining structure that we operate under. And it is, to me, surprising that in the 7 years I've been in this committee, we have never talked about that at all. Never raised that as an issue that should be debated or maybe changed or perhaps altered to give school districts some flexibility in managing this very, very large cost and setting aside the federal piece of it, which perhaps you're right, we can't do much about in the short term, but we certainly can talk about these things that are under the control of the state. And I'm still waiting to see if the school district representatives have any interest in having the Senate and the Legislature look at those laws to give you greater flexibility, or do you want to have the situation where the only alternative in managing your budget is to lay off the newer staff and keep the more experienced, older, higher-priced staff, and that is the only option that you have to balance a budget when you don't have revenue. Is that what, I just would like to know, we haven't addressed what I think is the fundamental problem, is that we have a system of governance at the school district level that doesn't provide flexibility to school boards to manage those costs. And we have to find a way to give them flexibility. And we could do that if we change the law. And all I'm trying to find out is, in addition to asking for a change in how we raise money, which I support, if you're also willing to have the legislature look at changing how we manage costs. And I just would like to get the testimony of the people representing the school district on that.
Superintendent, any ideas?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Senator Hann, in White Bear Lake, we have faced significant economic challenges. We've made the point to our staff and community that we can't use lack of resources as an excuse for not innovating and improving. And we know that that means within our district reallocating dollars from things we're spending on right now to things which we believe are more important for the future. Mr. Wilcoxon and I have conversations, if not daily, twice a day, on looking at every aspect of our budget to determine whether we can do things more efficiently and more effectively. Because 87% of the budget is spent on people we value and who come to work every day to do the best they can on behalf of children and families. That's certainly part of the conversation. You've asked for specifics. You've identified something that you believe is important to look at. As a school district, we'd be happy to work with the legislature to evaluate different ways of helping us control our costs. But I think it's important to recognize that in education, we rely on people making a long-term commitment to a profession, a decision that is generally made before college or during the college years to commit themselves to a lifetime of service. And so whatever we do, we want to be wise both for the short term and for the long term.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I appreciate the discussion. I do think that we should have a broader discussion. I think this kind of bill is, to me, a great vehicle to have that discussion on, because we are talking about how do you give school boards the authority to deal with their budget. And it's not just revenue. And that's what we forget. It's not just enhancing revenue that we need to think about, but also managing costs. And the fact is, today, if there is not enough revenue, and I appreciate that there are things that can be done to try to reduce costs, but invariably what happens is that when there's not enough revenue, the newest hired teachers get laid off en masse, and it happens in every school district. And I don't think that's, to me, right now, that is the only solution that districts have, and that's not right. We should be able to find a creative way to give school districts an opportunity to manage their costs in ways that give them more than just that option. And maybe, Senator Betzold, I don't know that you're willing to broaden your bill to try to include things of this nature, but I think that as we go forward, and certainly next year, this is a conversation we need to have. So thank you.